Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, and welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I'm your host, Pavini Moray, and today I am here with a beloved teacher, Rachel Pollack. And a while back, someone suggested to me that I dedicate an episode to Tarot, which I thought was a fabulous idea, but it just never really crossed my mind that I could invite my Tarot Shiro, the person whose seminal work on Tarot I've actually picked up in my hands every day for the last 10 years. And so today, she and I are going to be talking about queerness and magic and Tarot, ancestors, and the sacredness of gender liminality. So let me introduce you to Rachel Pollack. She is the author of 43 books of fiction and nonfiction, 43, including 2 award-winning novels, Unquenchable Fire and Godmother Night. Her Tarot books include 78 Degrees of Wisdom, which is the book that I have had in my hands every day, originally published in 1980, in print continuously ever since, described by Tarotists the world over as the Bible of Tarot readers. And a 3rd edition is coming out in 2019. She's also a comic book writer, including 2 years writing Doom Patrol after the groundbreaking run by Grant Morrison. And her run on Doom Patrol introduced comics' first transgender superhero, Kate Godwin, aka Coagula, self-described as a transsexual lesbian. Rachel has published a book of poetry, and with scholar David Vine, translated the ancient Greek play Oedipus Rex. She's also a visual artist, having designed and drawn her own deck, the Shining Tribe Tarot. And with famed Tarot artist Robert M. Place, she's created 2 more decks, the Burning Serpent Oracle and the Raziel Tarot. And her newest book, The Beatrix Gates, including stories, an essay, and an interview, will be published in early 2019. And so for more information on Rachel and on her work, you can visit her website at rachelpollack.com. Rachel, hi and welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's such a delight to have you. I just want to ask if there's any ancestors or transcestors that you would like to invite to be present with us for this conversation.
Well, that's a wonderful question. Well, there are all the unnamed ones who worship, in their own way and took on trans identities as part of their worship, particularly the worship of Artemis in ancient Greece and Rome and Turkey. Kybele was the name that she was known as in Turkey, and when she came to Rome, she brought with her her transgender worshippers, who have been slandered over the millennia by being called eunuchs, castrated men, etc., when obviously they were trans people. When they would actually perform self-surgery in ecstatic festivals, then they'd be healed by people, and then when they were healed, they'd be initiated, and they would wear wedding gowns, bridal dresses, to be initiated as a service of the goddess. So obviously, they never saw themselves as male eunuchs, saw themselves as women. So they're very special. I think that's part of our hidden ancestry. In an essay that I might be reading from a bit later, I write about how when I first came out, because we didn't have the word transition back then, as transgender or lesbian, I was doing lots of research into ancient sources, and I came across some things in Deuteronomy in the Bible, and it forbid cross-dressing, and it forbid males being castrated, forbid them to join the congregation. And you might think that seeing that I would be angry or feel hurt or in some way wounded, but actually I was very excited, because it to me was proof that people like me existed in ancient Israel, because you don't forbid the things that don't exist. So the ancestors, the hidden
Oh wait,
ancestors.
could you just say that one more time? You don't.
You don't forbid things that don't exist.
Right. So that just speaks, I just want to highlight that because I just feel like it speaks so much to, what's happening in our current political state.
Well, there's that too, but
Yeah.
I was thinking of like the ancient, all the ancient cases in which, we know there are trans people because of slander against them, or the forbidding of them, or the putting down of them, And on one level, it's very hurtful that that's how they were treated. But another level is evidence that they were there,
And powerful
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Very,
like enough
yeah.
to want to suppress that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for welcoming them in. Yeah. I also welcome them in. Curious of, what are the immediate, the really quick connections that you make between the ancestors and the tarot?
Well, I mean, the tarot is a very interesting situation because, many people assume it has very ancient origin. And there's been a lot of research, and it doesn't. It actually comes from early 15th century Italy. And its symbolism at that time was, part of the standard Christian symbols of virtues and vices and angels and so on, astrological symbolism. But it's picked up over time a lot of very ancient connections. And part of the way that people did that was to just make claims. They said it came from ancient Egypt, it came from the Romani, also known as gypsies, and so on and so on, Other people said it came from India. Other people said it came from ancient witches, and so on, And the thing is that if we give up the idea that, we have to have some historical evidence of all this and accept that these are inventions and that they're very powerful inventions. They're part of the creative energy of the tarot that comes through the tarot to us and that we give back to it. And so now there are thousands of tarot decks, and they're all, building on this energy that has been put into it by creators. So I think that everything is now in the tarot, and now in the modern time, we're finding more inclusive tarots, inclusive, racially inclusive as to male and female, inclusive as to queer people as well. And I think these are very, very exciting developments.
And so I think what I hear you saying is that the ancestral connection is that there's humanity, like our humanity has woven itself into this divinatory tool, this prophetic tool that we use. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it's not clear if the tarot was conceived originally as a prophetic tool. Most people think not, But as soon as people started to see the possibilities of that, then they were definitely weaving into it the ancient ways of doing divination, prophecy, dream interpretation, and so on. So those traditions came into it, fairly early on, and have only become stronger as time has gone by.
Well, what's your sense of where the information, like when we do readings, when we pull cards, when we cast bones or whatever, where's that information coming from?
That's a very, very difficult question to answer. I like to joke. There used to be this wonderful stand-up comic who was called Professor Irwin Corey, and he would come out on like the Tonight Show or something like that with Johnny Carson, and he would be dressed in a shabby tuxedo and basketball shoes, sneakers, and he would give this rambling, kind of incoherent lecture, which is a hilarious parody of pretentious, intellectuals, Then he'd sit down, and Johnny Carson, this is all planned, he would say, "Why do you wear sneakers?" And Professor Corey would say, "You pose a two-part question. Why has plagued philosophers throughout the ages? Great sages, great thinkers of all time have pondered the question why. Far be it from me in the short time allotted to me to try and answer the question of why. Do I wear sneakers? Yes." So when people say, "How does the tarot work?" I want to say, "You pose a two-part question." Because that's really what I mean. Who knows, But it definitely does work, and it definitely produces amazing results, But I think part of what we do with tarot is we come up with these creative ideas of where it's coming from. For some people, it has to be very literal. It has to be, actual gods and goddesses. It has to be ancestors. I think all those things are true. And if all those things are not true, I think there's a kind of energy level in which, there's a world of meaning beyond what our consciousness can access. And things like the tarot, with its symbolic imagery, allows us to enter into that world of meaning.
I think my favorite definition of magic is it's the science of hidden connection.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's like, I think that's what you're saying is like, I don't know how this works, but it does work. And there's, it's like there's access to these other deeper layers of symbol and meaning that become available when we use this tool.
Yeah, one thing that's fascinating is that, in the last 150 years or so, something like that, what's happened is like these old tarot decks have been around for a long time. And people started seeing things in them that probably their original creators did not particularly think about, For instance, the Tower of Marseille, which is, the older tradition. And, there's a book called Meditations on the Tarot by Anonymous, beautiful essays on Christian mysticism, looking deeply at the images in the Marseille Tarot. So did the people who designed those things intend that? I don't know. I think that there's a creative energy that sparks between the person who made the pictures, the person who looks at them, and the interpretive mind. And so all of that creates things that are very powerful. And the same with some of the more modern ones. The Rider deck, the one that's in 78 Degrees of Wisdom primarily, is the most successful and famous tarot deck in the world. It's the one that people think about when they think of tarot decks. It's the one that has the full and beautiful clothes with a little dog beside him. Anyway, that's been around since 1909. And people, have used the books that others have done and stuff like this. But now, on the internet, there are groups that spend a lot of time examining every single card of a magnifying glass and finding the most wonderful things, the most astonishing, symbolic, beautiful things that probably were never particularly thought about. Pamela Smith drew the pictures, and if you said to her, "Oh, look at this arrow on the spur of the boot of death is pointing to this cave on the hillside," and she might go, "Oh wow, look at that! I never saw that. I never noticed that." Because the artists do this all the time. We put things in pictures and books and stories that are deeply, deeply meaningful and about which we have no conscious connection or design. It all happens on an unconscious level, And
even if we are putting it in there consciously, it doesn't mean it's going to be received that way. I just think about like Bart saying like the death of the author, right? Like after you write something, you don't control how it's interpreted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've totally been in one of those tarot groups. I live in San Francisco and participated in the Thursday night tarot group for about a year.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And like, that's what they did. Like, it was like, and I was, kind of blown away of like, whoa, how did Pamela Smith really, like, she was that tuned in and like thinking about all those things. But I think it's just like what you're saying is how interpretation works with any art, right? Of like after the fact, people are like, oh, this is brilliant because this or this. And you're just like doing your thing. You're just making your art, living your life, right? And then,
well, what's interesting, I think, is that my experience as a novelist is that I am, in a sense, like protected from knowing what I'm doing.
Awesome. Yes.
Because if I know what I'm doing, I'll just be caught up in the symbolism of stuff, And I don't even know what the book is about. I have an idea what it's about. I think it's about such and such. And then I'll finish it. And only in the point where I get the proofs and it says you cannot change anything. That's the thing with publishers, All you can do is make corrections to mistakes. But if you want to change something, you have to pay them a lot of money. Anyway, only at that point do I suddenly become conscious of what seemingly was incredibly obvious. Seemingly was like, unbelievably, embarrassingly obvious, but I had no awareness of, So obviously it was there, I was doing it, but not consciously. So I feel there's a certain way in which the creative process protects the artist, writer, whoever, from being too aware of what they're doing. because that will just
Right.
block it out, you know?
Right. Then you're just like trying too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. That's interesting. Yeah. Do you find um, that there are certain cards in particular that are indicative of ancestors, ancestry, ancestral messaging, like anything like that?
Well, this is a question. I mean, it really depends how you look at cards, you know? I don't necessarily look at them that way, but I certainly could see how you could do that, you know? Um, the court cards, you know, could be seen that way. The ancestors of different elemental powers, you know? And then the major arcana cards, well, they're, you know, the magician and the high priestess are very ancestral because they're going back to very ancient practices, you know? Um, you also find that the emperor and the empress are more in this world, you know? And so is the Hierophant, where the Hierophant is like the translation of the spiritual energy into practice in the world, you know? But then the Lovers is something that's very old, and it's a kind of channel of energy that connects between people and spirit. So I think you could make this case in many ways for, you know, a lot of the cards. Um, and you could do readings about that, you know. It's not something I've done, it's something I'll think of doing actually, now that you brought it up.
Like you could read through an ancestral lens, is what you're meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Something I've been doing recently, looking at, is doing readings that are kind of like a mediumship that's connecting to the dead, connecting to dead spirits. And the focus has tended to be a little bit around the idea of doing this with individual people who died recently, connected to people getting the readings, you know. But also, you could certainly do it, and it's probably more like what I would do, really, is connecting it to the ancestors, you know, of all kinds, and letting them speak for the tarot.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think about like what you said is, I don't know how it works, but it works, right? And I
Yeah.
think about that with ancestral practices. Like, I don't exactly know how that works. I don't know how it is to communicate across that veil, but my sense is, you know, since I've started working with my ancestors and healing them up and healing me up and like all of that stuff, that life is better. You know, life is generally better, and life is better when I do the things that they suggest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so it's interesting because I think that there's a certain level of trust in the mystery, right? That you're having to take that leap of faith. Yeah.
Well, the very fact that you're accessing mystery is a very powerful thing to do, because then you go beyond the belief that your world is limited to the things right in front of you, you know, and the things that are right in front of other people, and the things that are in common agreement, you know. As soon as you allow the possibility of mystery, you go into a whole other level of existence. And, you know, my feeling is that you don't have to make this literal. You don't have to believe that you're literally connecting to so and so, but you can. And both ways of doing it are very powerful.
What would you say about tarot being a healing path, bringing healing forth?
I think it heals. I know there are people who use it for, you know, learning for what needs to be healed and medical procedures and all things like that. But to me, it would be primarily spiritual and emotional healing. Because, you know, if you're in a place where you need healing, you can use the cards to find other avenues, or just see what you need to do and see kind of like, you know, what you need to confront, what you need to look at, what you need to heal, how to heal. There's a lot of ways you can use the tarot for healing. As I said, there are some people who use it, you know, literally for medical diagnosis, you know. I don't, especially. In fact, if people come to me and they, you know, have a reading about being ill, being specifically, you know, specific illnesses, I'll make sure to say to them, you should never make medical decisions just based on a tarot reading, you know. But nevertheless, we will look at, like, you know, what is in a person's life, and, you know, what's going on with them and what needs to be healed. And then also ways to heal the things that are beneficial, maybe things that are not beneficial, you know?
So like really getting a sense of what's in the way. It just sounds like an extra set of eyes, really.
Yeah. And also what's interesting is that, like, the same card could be something you need or something you don't need. So the question is very important, If you say, what do I need to heal? And you get the Five of Cups in the Rider deck, which shows somebody all wrapped up in a black cloak and staring at three spilled cups. And there are two cups behind the person. So you might say, well, I need to heal. I need to, just really feel my pain. I need to really just spend time with the things that are lost. Spend time with sadness, And then if you say, what stops my healing? You get the same card. Well, then the answer is your healing is, harmed or hampered by being too fixated on what you've lost, And then you can say the same thing, same questions, and if the card comes out reversed, because there's those two cups behind the person. So it can say, now is the time to go beyond what's lost and see what remains and see what you have that's valuable to you, Some people just go right to that, which I find a problem, because the clear message of the card is one of sorrow. It's not a message of, happiness. Happiness is to come. Happiness is there, kind of in reserve behind the person. But the first message is one of sorrow. So again, the context of the question, is this something I need, something I don't need? That will totally, the card means the same thing, but the answer changes because you're asking it to tell you something different.
It's interesting what you said about the first interpretation that you said, which is like, oh, it's time to be with sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And how that lands for me is that this is a movement inwards, like it's a movement into the body, right? Into that the realm of like both feeling emotion and feeling sensation.
Yes.
And I really hadn't thought about the cards as that, like bringing that guidance of embodiment.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Certainly, that's one card that definitely does that because it's about sorrow, which is a bodily experience, as you say.
Yeah.
Our society has this weird, fear of grief. It's a kind of strange thing. I remember one time I did a reading for someone. She said that her father had died and it was several months had passed, and she was still feeling a lot of grief and sadness. And people were saying, come on, it's time you got over that, It's time you got back in the world, started enjoying life again. And she felt there was something wrong with her. And I told her friends were insane,
Yeah, totally.
And I told her about
they say at least 4 months. Come on.
Well, I told her about the Jewish tradition, which is the Jewish tradition is really kind of like a science of grief, after death. Because what they've done is they've how to put this, there's a graduated series of steps that begins with the funeral, then 7 weeks of sitting in mourning in the house, and then various stages, And after 11 months, you're finished. And you can then go back and resume your normal life. And, and you've resumed a lot of your normal life, but there's certain things you don't do until that 11-month period passes. And after 11 months, the tombstone is unveiled. It's called the unveiling. Tombstone is set up, but there's a black shroud over it. And then people gather, at the graveside. And then they say prayers and they, ceremoniously remove the veil, in a sense, the shroud, and they see the tombstone with the messages that are on it, and etc. And that's like the signal, in a sense, to that mourning is now finished, and you're now set up to go on with the rest of your life. But there's never that sense of pushing you. I've heard people say that after the funeral, you're supposed to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and get back to work and start dating and. This is crazy,
Yeah, we're definitely grief phobic. Do you think that any of that, like what you just described in that process of the Jewish unveiling, is any of that, is most of it for the living, or is any of it for the dead as well in their process of transition?
Well, I'm sure that traditionally there's a lot for the dead. Modern people tend to see it more for the living because mainstream modern Judaism has become, very anti. They think of it as superstition. Any thoughts about the other world, about ghosts or spirits. Let me give you an example. So in that 7-day period of mourning, when the mourners, the immediate family just doesn't leave the house, all the mirrors are covered, you know. So some people say, well, this is so that you shouldn't be vain. You shouldn't be looking at yourself in the mirror. You're thinking about your dead relative, And then I think the official rabbinical saying is that in fact it's an act of mercy to you, because you're going to be such a wreck in that week, that if you look in the mirror, you'll just be horrified. So it's better to cover the mirror and not be confronted by the image of how grief-stricken you are. But I've always been convinced, and people said there's some evidence of this, that the original idea was the fear that the spirit of the ghost will come back through the mirror and will get stuck in this world instead of passing on to the next world, And that those 7 days are part of it is the helping of this crucial period of time for the person to move on, the dead person to move on to wherever they have to go,
Yeah, it's cool. Because that period of transition, right? That gateway, that portal between this world and the next world, like it's almost like when someone dies, we enter it with them to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Like that grief produces that liminal state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then we have to let it go because, it's not our time.
Right. Yeah.
But this is why doing it in stages helps you, because you have just a natural process of letting go in stages,
Yeah. I want to talk with you about gates, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yes, I'm going to read something from 78 Degrees of Wisdom. You're talking about the gate cards, and you write, the philosophical bias of the cards leads us always in the direction of hidden forces giving shape and meaning to ordinary experience. A truly realistic view of the world will recognize the spiritual energy always present within the constantly shifting patterns of the world. The Rider Pack greatly encourages such awareness. The Rider Pack does more than teach us this awareness. Certain cards, taken in the right way, can help produce it. And I call these cards gates because of the way in which they open a path from the ordinary world to the inner level of archetypal experiences. They all share certain characteristics, complex, often contradictory meanings, and a myth-like strangeness, which no allegorical interpretation can completely penetrate. And you go on with that. Yeah, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit about gate cards, because the thing I've been sitting with around gender liminality is around are trans people, like and gender blessed people, the gate cards of human experience. And just wondering if you could, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it's possible, but I don't know that should be put on every person who's, non-conforming, gender changing in some way. I think that a lot of people, how to put this, they're much more grounded in activities of this world, and that's really what they're looking for. They're not looking to be a spiritual gate for others, but for many it is. I mean, it's, and, what's interesting is that, how to say this, that that idea of like, the spirituality of transgender people and how powerful that is something I think that is very important, because even if you yourself are not interested in that aspect of it, it just says that there's a background, It's not some weird modern invention. It's not something to feel ashamed about. There's an ancestor level of it. There's a history, And for many of us, older generation people, this was very important. This was kind of a work I took on to discover this, to write about it, to share it with people. And I think that it had an impact at the time I was doing this, which was the early 90s. I transitioned in the early 70s, and then I was involved at that time with, kind of radical activities, and then I kind of dropped out for a while. And in the 90s, I came back into the situations and really was focused a lot on things like, transgender gods and goddesses of ancient times, and how they I wasn't really so much concerned about the outer society, about us, what we needed for kind of spiritual healing, because the thing that so many people were experiencing was that they felt, society had put into them a great deal of shame of who they were. And you don't heal from shame just by saying, I'm all right, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm good, because it doesn't really touch that unconscious feeling of pain that's in you, a feeling of not being worthy, or there's something wrong with you, which was the way of thinking for, so long,
Right.
A medical illness, a mental illness, et cetera, et cetera. But, what does heal that is to find something more powerful that's positive. And to me, that is that idea of spiritual power, and like ancient tribal and spiritual histories around the world. And to see that, this is something that's just very, very old,
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think what you're, with the invitation to those more ancient elder powers of the gender blessed, like it's good medicine right now, right? It's like, how do we root into that? How do we really take heart, take like full heart, take courage with those ones at our backs, right? Knowing that this is like a very singular and yet completely diverse experience of holiness. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, to do this, you have to like get through a lot of misinterpretation and outright slander and so on. I remember like back in the 90s when I was doing some of this work, other people were doing this work too, and it was useful to me, but their focus was different. And there was this kind of battle that went on between gay men and trans women.
Yep.
As to who could claim these ancestors, and kind of like, happily that kind of thing is over pretty much. But I mean, really, anyone that feels a connection to, because, our society is different than ancient tribal societies. And if who you are, you see reflected in something old and something that was, powerful spiritually, then by all means, just accept, take that on and, see yourself as part of that, you just shouldn't do that and say that other people are not allowed to see themselves,
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to think about it that like all of us have, like everyone have ancestors who are queer, who are trans, who are gender nonconforming, who are, all of the kinds of human experiences that we have now. Like our ancestors already have had those experiences. Like we're nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's happened, with industrial culture is it tried to maintain it was new, trying to maintain it was this wonderful new breakthrough, the so-called enlightenment, giving up, the sort of superstitions of the past and living purely rationally. And one of the things it did was obscure things that were very valuable and had to be rediscovered by some modern people,
It's like we went deep underground.
Kind of, yeah.
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 I mean, it's a great strategy. It's like very, it's like preservationist, right?
Well, I mean, it's not even a strategy that's done by us. It's something that's imposed on us to like, hide from us who we are, and what our history is, by making it some modern phenomenon. There's this strange, bizarre history in modern times of different particular countries claiming that their country did not have any queer people or gay people.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That was a sickness of some other country. So both Israel, which is now a very strong place of queer rights, went through this period of claiming there were no gay people in Israel because no Jews were gay, because gay was some kind of Christian perversion, And the Chinese claimed that they had no gay people because gayness and queerness was a sickness of capitalism.
I think the Russians are still claiming that, right?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and apparently the United States has no trans people anymore. So
yeah.
Right?
That was so bizarre. That story came out about claiming, I wrote to someone, I said, if I suddenly blink out of existence, I'm charging you with the memory that I once existed.
Yeah, right.
If all my books suddenly
But where would
vanish,
we? I'm just
you remember them,
where are we going? I hope that you have a good future for us, Rachel.
Well, I think that actually, I'm trying to be optimistic and say that even though there are currently hateful people in charge, that there's so much has happened that can't be turned back. I read recently that 56% of people under 20, I guess teenagers, and so know somebody who does not have standard pronoun, who is not he or she.
That's great.
Yeah. So maybe they're not themselves, but they know someone. That's more than half, and they just take it in stride. So to them, the idea that, all these people don't exist is just silly, And in fact, the thing about that thing from Trump was that memo was written half a year ago and never released. And it can't be, because there's too many it doesn't have the power to make that kind of statement, because there's too many laws, state and federal and so on and so on and so on that do, protect trans people's rights and cannot simply, write people out of existence. But much more significant, I think, is the communal support that, that we've been getting, and that, and that becomes a standard thing that people now, so many people know a trans person or a gender nonconforming person, and now, trans people are getting seats in, legislatures and so on. Danica Rome in Virginia, the person that she defeated was the person who tried to pass a law banning, trans people from using public toilets, or forcing them to use the wrong one, which had the same effect because they wouldn't do it, And so the man who wrote that law, which I don't think passed in Virginia, was beaten by a transgender woman, So, I mean, that's such a significant thing,
I really am appreciative of the reframe that you're offering, which is that the attempts at suppression can be read as indicators of recognition of great power. Super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and also recognition of the fact that, so much of the world just takes it in stride. Because, ACT UP had that famous slogan telling gay people to come out.
Right. Yeah.
And it really worked. It was a big, big impact for straight people to discover they had, gay siblings, gay cousins, gay children, gay parents, so on. And it's the same thing with trans people, I mean, the more people who have someone in their families, or close friends who are trans, even if they're not themselves, the more they will not agree that, this is just disgusting and something you have to get rid of, and it's a perversion, I had a friend years ago, and this was well before the current explosion of consciousness and awareness, But so she had, was starting to transition, and she was very nervous about telling her boss, because she worked in, I don't know, it was a construction company, but some kind of, real masculine kind of company, and she, didn't know how to tell her boss, that she was going to make this change, So finally she got up the courage and went in to see him. And she said that, that she was, transsexual was the word they were using back then. And she had started treatment and was going to, change and live as a woman, And her boss suddenly kind of laughed, and he said, "Is that what's been bothering you?" He said, "You should have told me. My sister used to be my brother."
Oh,
It's a lovely story, But I mean, that's that impact of actually knowing somebody,
Right. Yeah, having that personal connection. So speaking of stories, I'm really wanting to give you a little bit of time to talk about this new book that's coming out. It's because it's a pretty special book, yeah? And maybe you'd even read something for us.
Yeah, so it's a book featuring my work. It's called The Beatrix Gates, which is the title of one of the stories, actually. It's about trans people. And it was originally printed in an anthology called The Future is Queer, which did not get enough attention in the States. It was actually a Canadian anthology. a really good collection of writers, you know. So I'm glad that it's being reprinted now in a collection featuring me and my work. So there's that story. There's a story about the character of Joseph in the Bible called Burning Beard, the dreams and visions of Joseph ben Jacob, Lord Viceroy of Egypt. It's his full title. And that's a very radical retelling of Jewish mythology and the character of Joseph. Um, and then there's a short story. I had this idea once to do a cycle of myths, sort of retold mythology, all centered around a lesbian bar. There's exactly one story called The Woman Who Didn't Come Back about the relating to dead spirits in this group of lesbians. Anyway, so that's in there. And then there's an interview with me by the editor, Terry Bisson, who I've known for a long time. And part of the interview is about Terry's very political, and so we were talking about radical queer politics. He's straight, but he's a very radical guy. And then this essay by me called Trans Central Station, which is kind of my history and my connections between being transgendered and being a science fiction writer and a comic book writer. And sort of, and so maybe I could read from a bit of that, you know?
Be great, yeah.
I mean, the simplest thing would be just to read from the opening, because otherwise the later stuff you'd have to get context. So I'll read from the opening of this. It actually begins with two lists of words, and they're side by side, but I'll have to read them as separate lists, otherwise it'd be too confusing. On the page, you can see them as side by side. So the first list is called Some Words That Did Not Exist When I Transitioned. Transition, transgender, cisgender, gender binary, gender non-binary, gender fluid, sex assigned at birth, gender assigned at birth, sex reassignment surgery, SRS, gender reassignment surgery, GRS, gender confirmation surgery, GCS, trans woman, trans man. The other list is some words that no longer or almost no longer exist. Sex change, transsexual, transvestite, real woman, real man, genuine girl, Gigi, genetic girl, Gigi, she-male, he, she-he, female or male impersonator, a woman trapped in a man's body, a man trapped in a woman's body. Then it goes on, the essay begins properly. Each of the lists above contains 13 entries. 13 is the traditional number of a witch's coven, a place where spiritual outlaws perform magic, often in the service, or maybe alignment, with the ancient goddess of the moon, the hunt, mountains, and wild animals, especially bears, Artemis Diana. The figure is so old that no one actually knows the origin or meaning of the name Artemis. We return to Artemis and bears later in this essay. When I was growing up, the idea that I should ever tell anyone of my desires, to wear girls' clothes and somehow, in some vague way, be thought of as a girl, was unspeakable. I did not mean something vile, as in the old horror cliche, an unspeakable evil, though there were people who might have thought that if I indeed had ever spoken of it. Nor did I mean something sinful, that which must not be spoken, though there certainly were people who would have thought and said that. No, I mean something much more basic. What I felt, what I desired, was unspeakable because, for me at least, the words did not exist. Or rather, the telling did not exist. Let me go further. To speak of such things to anyone was in fact unthinkable. The mind could not form the thought. I did not wish to tell people and didn't dare. I simply could not imagine doing it. Let me be clear about something else. By doing, I did not mean wear girls' clothes. I did that with bits of my older sister's wardrobe, or even my mother's, when I had a reasonable certainty I would not get caught. No, I mean speaking, sharing, as the 12-step people say, with myself, God, and another human being. I certainly spoke with myself. I was very aware of my desires. Oddly, I did not concern myself very much with God. I grew up in a Jewish family, members of an Orthodox shul, and considered myself religious until about 15. When I became an atheist, happily that phase didn't last long, I now think of myself as a radical, goddess-loving Jew, or simply describe my religion as heresy. Somehow it did not occur to me that God might consider my desires and secret actions as sinful, or something to arouse his anger. Of course, nor did I expect God to approve. It simply seemed outside God's purview. Perhaps if I'd known about Artemis, but that came later, much later. I might add, however, that when that time came, now I'd begun to explore the ancient roots of transgender. I came across places in the Torah that forbid both cross-dressing and castration. Oddly enough, I did not feel guilt, shame, or even anger. Rather, it excited me because it meant people like me existed in ancient Israel. You do not forbid what doesn't exist. But as I say, all that came later. Growing up, I did not worry about God knowing my desires. But other people, even that proverbial another human being, that lay beyond even imagination. This silence was not something that began, say, in adolescence. My earliest memory, around 4 or 5, involved an intense conscious desire to wear girls' clothes, the equally powerful, yet mostly unconscious conviction that no one, absolutely no one, must ever know. Not my parents, not some mythical best friend whom I could tell anything, quite simply no one. People say of transsexuals, by which they mostly meant transgender women, that they were women trapped in men's bodies. Some people attribute the expression and the term transsexual itself to a psychiatrist named Harry Benjamin, but I've seen that claim contested. But that does not describe me. When I came out as a woman and a lesbian, this was 1971, I remember the term transition did not exist then, I realized that I was in exactly the right body. My body told me what I wanted. In the early 90s, the activist Ricky Wilshins came up with the wonderful slogan, "I'm not trapped in anybody's body." And Nora Hall, brilliant writer on mythology and the psyche, wrote once, "Abandonment to the body's desire is in itself a form of revelation." No, I was not trapped in the wrong body. I was trapped in the wrong universe. In order to become who I was, I had to break the world open. I had to embrace a kind of science fiction life, or maybe a magical life, by which I mean the ability to experience the world and connections and myself in ways that did not fit the standard model of reality. I use that term standard model, ironically, for it refers to Niels Bohr's description of quantum physics as disconnected from the everyday world. But of course, I'm not talking about entangled particles or quarks, or whether electrons or waves or particles, or even Schrodinger's long-suffering cat hidden inside a box and both alive and dead at the same time, though the famous observer opened the box and looked. Or maybe the cat is exactly the right metaphor. If we think of the box as the closet, and the experience of so many trans people and queer people in general as alive and dead at the same time, until they themselves open the box and allow the world to actually see them. And even more, to see ourselves. For many trans people, this moment of seeing, of discovering that the cat is very much alive, comes as a kind of revelation. For me, it came in 1971. I'd already taken small steps to open up. The radicalness of the times, especially the examples of women's liberation, the new gay liberation movement, encouraged me to tell my partner my need to dress secretly and only occasionally as a woman. I'm going to skip over some stuff here about my relationship at the time. So I said I told my partner and experimented in very small ways, but things remained tense. Schrodinger's cat was not yet alive, but certainly not dead. To extend the metaphor, I had pried open the lid, but had not dared to actually look. And then came that moment. I was with some friends, just having fun, and at a certain point I was sitting by myself when the thought came I could no longer put off the question, did I want to become a woman? And almost the instant I allowed myself to ask that, the answer came like a kind of revelation. I did not want to be a woman, I already was. Since then I've discovered other trans people's accounts of what I'm calling the moment. One woman said it was like a glass wall shattering. Her real life had always existed on the other side, and now she could enter it. Another said she had been going through great anxieties and told her girlfriend she was going to take a shower and try to clear her head. Standing in the water, she thought, what's the worst all this could be? A moment later, she came out of the shower, dripping and astonished, and told her friend, I'm a woman. Her friend replied, it's about time you figured that out. A trans man friend of mine once told me that for years, while he was trying to live as a woman, he would have a terrifying dream in which he would look into his grandmother's full-length mirror, the kind that turned on a hinge with the second mirror on the other side. When he looked, there was no one there, as if the person looking in the mirror did not really exist. When he finally accepted that he wasn't a butch lesbian, he was a man, he had the dream again. But now as he stared at the empty glass, a voice said, turn me around. He flipped the mirror to the other side and saw a man staring back at him. So I think I'll stop there, just give examples of, how people have experienced that moment of revelation that has been building up all their life, but they've not allowed themselves to kind of see it.
When we walk through the gate.
Yeah. I shall read you one more short passage of,
Sure.
About the idea of being told we don't exist, kind of like the physical world may be made out of elementary particles and dark matter, but the world of our lives is made out of language. With the wrong language, one of strict categories and confinement, the world becomes a fake, a stage set whose actors don't know they're in a play, a Potemkin village whose inhabitants think they live in the real world. Most people do not notice this because their own sense of self, of language, more or less fits the received version of existence. They still suffer. From the world of strict and very limited categories, they must constantly check themselves against the model of a real man or a real woman. The ones who reveal the fake are the ones who simply cannot make themselves fit. To not fit can bring great pain and often very real danger. Yet who else can discover the light behind the screen? That's just another example of the whole idea, and goes into some of the dangers that people face and some of the suffering, but also, the joy and the brilliance, of living a life that, includes these kinds of things,
The sensitivities that we get, the gifts that we get from it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I write here also about how, living in a world that didn't recognize my existence, I was drawn to science fiction, but also to comics because in comic book characters have secret identities in which they had vast powers. And I feel that basically all superheroes are queer.
Oh, that's great.
They may not know it, or the readers might not know it, but basically it's a queer nexus of ideas. That someone who lives an ordinary life has a secret life that involves changing their clothes.
And being very powerful. Yeah.
And being very powerful and also I realized one time that, superheroes are shamanic, and very unconsciously so, because most of them have animal powers. Most obviously Spider-Man. Do you know the comic, the something or other Squirrel Girl?
I don't know that one.
It's hilarious. It's this wonderful, hilarious parody of Spider-Man that's put up by Marvel. It's an absolute joy, She has proportional powers of a squirrel.
That's great. So, Rachel, your book is coming out next year, yeah?
Early next year.
Through PM Press, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
And so folks can find that there.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to say in closing?
I think it's a very exciting time because I think so much is happening. And so much of the world is opening up. And I think this is something that's not going to, anything could always be lost, there's always the dark times in any history. But I think right now I'm optimistic. I think that, these things will continue. And, I just listened yesterday to a podcast by Charlie Jane Anders, who's a trans woman science fiction writer. And it's about the explosion of, trans science fiction. There's now an anthology every year of it, it's called Transcendent. I think they've had 3 volumes so far, Topside Press, which is a trans press, has done this really big, thick anthology of transgender science fiction. And so, and other people are doing other things. There's TV characters. Supergirl now has a transgender character and so on. So I think that this is something that's not going to be just wiped away. Trump or anyone else cannot just declare it doesn't exist,
We're on the upswing for sure. Yeah.
I hope so. I try to be optimistic,
Wonderful. Well, Rachel, it's been such a deep honor to have you here on Bespoken Bones.
Thank you very much.
Wow, I can't believe that I got to spend the afternoon talking with you. So grateful and thankful.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much.
And just wanting to direct folks to your website, which is rachelpollack.com.
Yeah, and my blog, which is rachelpollack.wordpress.com.
Oh, great. Perfect.
And also I can be found on Facebook. So,
what's your Facebook?
Just my name, Rachel Pollack.
Rachel Pollack. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways for folks to reach you. And
yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. And thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Bespoken Bones. And if you feel inspired by what you heard here, you can check out more on transastralhealing.com. That's my website. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear how this episode landed for you, what you're thinking about it, what your feelings are. I want to hear, what your ancestral tarot practices are. So feel free to reach out to me via the contact form there. I'd love to hear from you. This is Pavini Moray, and I'll be back every new and full moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.